Hello. Most of you know me online as Chaotic D. My name is Daniel Gazorek, and I am the developer and designer of the Tomorrow Children 2D fan project. And for those that are unaware, this is based on the Tomorrow Children, which originally came out on the PlayStation years ago before it was delisted and removed, and the game actually became unplayable. So originally I had created a kind of a tech demo as a homage to the original work that was currently unplayable, and then later the developers themselves decided to obtain the rights for the Tomorrow Children and re-release it as the Phoenix Edition. So after they had purchased the Phoenix Edition rights, I decided to reopen the original tech demo that I had created for the Tomorrow Children 2D and start reimagining it towards what the Phoenix Edition had done. The improvements, the changes, the visuals. And so today we're going to be kind of going over an overview on how I designed the introduction that is currently available online for the Tomorrow Children 2D, while we also play the new Phoenix Edition release on the PlayStation 4 and get an idea on the comparisons between the two. So on the left side of the screen here, you can see that I have the actual game open on the PlayStation 4. And on the right side of the screen, you can see the application that I used to create the Tomorrow Children 2D. I used a program called Scratch, and Scratch is an educational software designed for elementary and middle school students that uses block code instead of having to type everything out individually. And this is a great introduction for somebody that hasn't had much experience with coding. And this is what I use for teaching elementary and middle school during different game design camps, because it's very easy to use. There's a lot that you can do with it, and although there's a huge amount of limitations, you can kind of work around them, and I'm going to be kind of talking about that as we get further into this. So, one thing to be very aware of before we even start here is that Scratch is a 10 megabyte software, meaning that there's not much that you can do with 10 megabytes. Just sound by itself is already close to that 10 megabyte cap. So how do we make an entire game in 10 megabytes? It's a lot of trial and error trying to figure out what can fit, what you need to prioritize on, and what you don't. It's the same for your music. What music matters that goes into the game so that it can run, and what doesn't. It's also a 480 by 360 resolution software. So there's a limitation on how large you can place all of your sprites, your objects, your environments, your characters. 480 by 360 pixels is a very small window. So how do you design your artwork to fit into that scope? How do you design your characters? How do you design your environment? And these are all things that you have to consider when using a program that has limitations like this. I'm actually going to be using 1.4, which is the original version of Scratch from probably around 10 years ago. And the reason for this is because it has a lot less features than the newest editions, but because of that, it kind of helps it in a way, and there's a lot of bugs with the newer versions. So what I generally try to do is design all of my applications in this software on the 1.4 version and then import it into the latest iteration to continue editing. So we're going to go ahead and begin. And the very first thing that I'm going to kind of talk about here is creating this title screen. So I'm going to go ahead and start this. And as you can see, I kind of have the credits showing up. It's telling you that the software is 360 by 480. It's telling you that it has 10 megabytes. It's telling you who made the game. This is all important information for somebody that doesn't know what they're playing. And then, of course, when it comes up, you can see that you have that same, not quite the same colors, but you still have that same visual animation going on for the logo, and you have that same kind of effect going on, but built into that 480 by 360 resolution. All of the art was custom made by myself. Even the text that you see on the screen was all custom made specifically for this app. So the options button, the town select, the credits, all of that was custom made font specifically for this 360 or 480 by 360 resolution that we're in. Same for the actual game's logo. This was recreated to fit in that exact same resolution so that it didn't skew and didn't create any weird visuals when brought into the software. Now, originally when I designed and unfortunately you're not going to be able to see my mouse, but originally when I designed this menu screen, all of these different parts that you see on here, which is the black border that creates kind of that television aesthetic, or the logo, or the buttons, or the kind of television set effect that's being created, or the brightness change, all of that was separate. And it was all completely different sprites and objects on the application. But what ended up happening was during the original tech demo that I created, there was so much running on this title screen because of all of those visual effects that I had added and so many layers going on that it had actually started to slow down the menu. So instead, I decided to combine all of that. So I actually screenshotted each of the animation frames for this title screen, and I combined them into one object. So instead of it all being a massive amount of different effects that are all going on at the same time, this minimizes it so you only have one effect going on, so that the game runs significantly smoother and you don't have that delay going on all the time. For example, there was even a bug where if you clicked on the screen while that many effects were going on, it actually started to reduce the frame rate of the application. So doing it in this way, you resolve those problems so that you don't have that for any other effects that you may want to have going on in the background. And so, really quick, so we can go over here, and you can't see my mouse pointer, but if you highlight over these buttons, I designed it so that there is a very small rectangled copy of these options, town select, and credits. And when you highlight over them, they're going to slightly give off a gray button prompt. So the costume for these buttons that I can open up here is actually changing as I highlight over this. And you can see the difference between the A and B costume for this specific sprite. And this gives the feeling that when you hover over something, there's an interaction for the player of, I feel like I'm doing something. Oh, this is a button that I can click on. If you don't have any of those interactions, it's not as interesting to experience when you're actually playing through the app. And this is simply created by using a when not touching the mouse pointer and when touching the mouse pointer to switch between these two. And there's a specific reason that the code is done in this way as well, where I have a if menu equals 1 and if menu equals 0. The Tomorrow Children 2D's menu has a bunch of different animations for a railway system that is moving in the background. So because that has to be moving and you want to be able to seamlessly move between menus and have that railway system animated going on, it's good to have your code so that it can seamlessly transition back and forth. So for example, menu 1 is in fact this standard title screen that you see, that you have the options, the town select, the credits. And then when you go to town select, the menu changes to 2. When you click on options, menu changes to 3. When you click on credits, menu changes to 4. And this helps to determine what needs to run seamlessly between all of the different pages, so that when I click between different menu buttons, the code's not restarting, it's immediately toggling on and off what needs to be running on that specific page. So we're going to go ahead and click on town select here, and here you can go ahead and see the menu scroll that I was talking about for the map. And this is actually an old version of this this menu. So you'll notice there's a little bit of a jitter with the map itself, and this was resolved. And I'm also going to talk about that. So when we go to the map here, Scratch does not have a camera system like a normal game engine at all. So because there's no camera system, you don't have any sort of operable camera that you can move around or tell where to be looking. Instead, it's all coordinate based. So if you want something to be in frame, you have to tell it its coordinate position in comparison to something else. So everything has to have its own coordinates, and everything has to have where it's located in this giant empty grid. So basically think of it as this is just the window that you're looking at here. This square that we can see the game in. And all around this, to the left, the right, the up, the down, you have this endless grid. And this is all negative numbers, positive numbers. It's the locations, your X and Y's of where something is in the game world. So we have to tell the software where it's located without being able to actually just use a camera for moving the camera itself. This means almost all the game objects in the game need to have its own coordinates and need to move at the same time. And that's a lot of memory, and that leads to a lot of complications. But with the simplicity of the software, that's something that you have to consider. This actually has the slow motion because when I made this originally, and this is the crazy code for the scrolling effect here, I decided to have the X and the Y moving at the same time. There's a problem with this because you can't move both up, down, and left and right at the same time. They have to be separate things. So all that this had to have is kind of separated into two different parts. I separated one into an X movement, and I separated one into a Y movement, and all of a sudden both of them run, and it's not fighting each other. So right now it's kind of, it can only go either up or down or left or right. So it's kind of fighting it. It's trying to decide, do I want to go up first? Do I want to go left first? So when we separate that into those two scripts, it helps to resolve that so that they can both run seamlessly without having to fight over which one is first. Now, as for this, the way that I program this is it randomly picks a location on the grid, and it will continue to move towards that position. And then it'll randomly pick a new location, and it'll continue to move towards that position, and so on and so forth. And it'll keep creating these random coordinates for the map to move at until it reaches that point and then switches. And this actually resets the coordinates when you switch off of this menu. So for example, if I go back to this menu screen and I click on credits, the map will move to a different location because it has now chose different coordinate positions. If I click on return and I click on town, you'll notice we're now at a completely different spot on the map, and this has now picked a new destination for the map to go. Same thing as before, I have my buttons with the interactions so that people can know. Now this menu actually functions, but I currently have the second and third buttons disabled. And these were programmed in a way where whatever one you select is highlighted in red, where the rest are highlighted in gray. And this also gives an indication on, okay, I click on this, it highlights it. I can now click confirm and it will take me there. So now that we have kind of a brief introduction on how all of the title screen mechanics and the systems behind that work, to a certain extent, we're going to go ahead and start playing through the Phoenix Edition, and I'm going to kind of talk about some of the changes that I've done and some of the attempts at trying to recreate the original. So we can click on this, and it will load into... right now it actually loads into the notes section, so this is the current update on the game. And we don't actually have access to a town select because the game has never been played on this account. But I don't have the ability of doing save data on this specific application, so instead of it being a new game option, we just have the introduction option here. So we click on New Game, and we can click on Introduction, and it will load into the same scene for the original version from Q Games to my version on Scratch. So let's go ahead and start here. I'll click on Introduction and Confirm. And I will click New Game. And so even this screen, I recreated the design for the administrator and I copied the exact text. So we can see that the text is the same on both versions. But I don't have that same camera motion that the original has. That being said, I did try to make the animation for the administrator move and blink as separate objects. So there you have kind of the comparison between the two. I didn't have the ability to do all of the camera motion because of the resolution difference and not having the physical camera, but I was able to kind of recreate the text and the dialogue into the 2D project from the original, and I recreated the animation of the character talking, the character blinking, with the character kind of standing in the void to try to create the same feel. I don't know if it actually was visible on the 2D project, but I also tried to create kind of a floating effect in the background that kind of randomly moves up and down to kind of give it a little more of a visual interaction, because of how static the screen is without having all of that camera momentum. So as soon as we start, our character on the PlayStation 4 is in the void. And this is a very empty blank space you see around us. And the only thing in front of us is a television. So as soon as we start the game here, I coded it so that only certain buttons appear at a time. And this adds to the tutorial experience a little bit differently than the actual game. So instead of focusing more on here's all the buttons, here's all the UI, or you've used a game controller before, you should know how it works, sort of ordeal. Because this is both designed for PC and touch control, I decided to have the buttons visible on the screen while also indicating that yes, you can use a keyboard. And then because I had some issues with the original tech demo and some conflict with what do I do, what do I press, I decided to add the animated arrow that moves throughout the tutorial so that players have a sense of exactly where things are located, and it makes it a little bit easier. So this is actually very complicated here, and this doesn't look like much. But what I decided to do is as soon as the tutorial loads, every single object in this entire game is enabled and disabled. So right now, all of the buttons other than the right button is disabled. So I have all of these variables that I use as a Boolean for a true and false to indicate if you are able to press it or if you are not. If it's animated and if it is not. Which animation is being played. What something looks like. So for example, the television here. The television, which is TVA, has specific animations that play based on what the tutorial progress is. So I created another variable which tracks the entire tutorial progress, which is simply named tutorial. And this is like, okay, you are on tutorial step number 19, this is what it needs to look like. Oh, you're on tutorial step 20. You need to stop. Oh, you're on tutorial step 21. Okay, let's change the visuals to look like this. And this gives a sense of the game kind of knowing without having a ridiculous amount of back and forth code between things, because everything is tracked based on that one tutorial number progression. So as we can see with TVA, and I can actually bring this up here, here is all of the different variables that are being tracked in the background for this introduction here. And I can go down to tutorial and I can click on it, and you can see tutorial is currently on tutorial 19. So as you can see, if tutorial equals 19 or 20, switch to costume A and B. And as you can see, costume is A and B for the tan and the gray. So this already creates that visual introduction on how the code works. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and use D to walk, and I can press it, and you'll notice that this text changes. And if I find the text, which is here, you can see that I have a lot of wait untils in this software. So I had the text show. Up here, I told it what the text looks like. And then I said, wait until tutorial equals 20. It is now 20. So it changes its visual. And I use this code throughout the whole thing. A lot of wait untils are used to indicate when it needs to progress. And this is to allow the software to not, or to have the least amount of things running at the exact same time. So we're going to walk over to the television on the Scratch version. And here's another indicator. When the character touches an object, highlight the object to tell players that this is usable. This is something that can be interacted with. So every single time that an object is highlighted in the game, there is separate animation for all of them that create that visual, that gray outline to tell the player, hey, you are standing on this object. You can press a button and something will happen. So let's go ahead and do that on the Phoenix Edition. And I'm going to try to time this. We can see we have the same text. And you'll notice every single time that I click on the confirm button, this tutorial number changes. Alright, so our character receives our transceiver, we have the transceiver animation pop on screen, and then our transceiver button appears on screen. Now in the actual Tomorrow Children game, or the Phoenix Edition, the transceiver is a button that we can press on the controller to bring up, but because we are using touch control and mouse and keyboard, we also need something that you can tap. So I've gone ahead and added a transceiver tappable object onto the screen so that you can tap it with your finger and you'll be able to take those transceiver calls. So now that this is done, you'll notice that a second screen popped up. And you'll notice that the staircase kind of showed off. And it's a little hard to show the structure forming on Scratch because you have that limited viewpoint. But if we go ahead and walk up to it, you'll see that I tried to kind of create that same cubic structure with the stairs. So we'll go ahead and walk to this. And let's see if I can time this again. Now we have obtained our pickaxe. And the first thing that happens is the game automatically opens the inventory. Now I decided to do this a little bit different. Instead of automatically opening the inventory, I decided that the players needed to do it. And this was a great opportunity to tutorialize the bag. So as soon as the tutorial reaches this point, which is currently tutorial 35, the bag icon will slowly appear on screen. And the arrow moves to adjust it, and the text displays bag button or space to open. So we click on the bag, and now our inventory screen shows up. Now, this was trial and error, trying to figure out how do we redesign the inventory screen from the original game to a smaller, simpler rendition. Because as you can see, there's these 4 smaller slots that are on the left side. And then there's actually a second page that I can't bring up during this tutorial. But because things need to be a little bit simpler, there's going to be less items in 2D than in the full Phoenix Edition release. How can we simplify this to make it easier? So simply the top row, these 4 squares on the top of the ticket here for the inventory, is our inventory for items. So this is our pickaxe, our shovel, our chainsaws, all of the different items that we're going to be using to collect material in the void. These 4 on the bottom are the collected material. So this is going to be your iron that you mine, your wood that you collect from your trees, your food that is stored and picked up to supply your town with food. So on the original version for the PlayStation, we have 7 inventory slots that are for tools. Whereas on Tomorrow Children 2D, we only have those 4. And then the inventory for picking up objects such as our iron and our wood are indicated with the bag resource slots here. Whereas on my iteration, it is the 4 squares below. And there's actually a lot going on the screen that you don't necessarily notice. So for example, if I click on and I open up the code for slot 1, and thank you, then I actually have a lot of different code going on behind the scenes that display this. It is actually telling the game what object is in slot 1. It is a pickaxe. Okay. Does the pickaxe have active durability? How many times can you use the pickaxe before it breaks down? And I don't have that number specifically displaying on the introduction because I don't think it's necessary to display, but there is a number that is currently invisible that shows up in the corner for how long or how much more durability this item has. And then it also has, is this item active? So if I open up the costumes for the inventory slot 1, we can see that we have the blank slot, we have the unequipped pickaxe, the equipped pickaxe, the unequipped shovel, the equipped shovel, unequipped chainsaw, equipped chainsaw, the unequipped rammer, and the equipped rammer. So this actually seamlessly changes based on which item is equipped at the current time and which item is in your inventory in which slot. So actually all of these are actually here, and I can click on these and you'll see it kind of blink because I have the code on that is telling it. There's actually nothing here. But if we click on these, you'll see that it kind of blinks because this is actually a piece of all of the code running seamlessly in the background. And it doesn't look like much. Right now it kind of looks like, oh, well, it's just a basic ticket. There's not much going on. And then I click this and it turns red. But in reality, there's all kinds of code going on for all of these buttons to tell it what is happening behind the scenes. So just like on the actual game, we can highlight which shape we're going to use, and it creates that red kind of background visual. If you highlight over the pickaxe in 2D's inventory and you click on it, it will then permanently become red to indicate that this is an item that you have equipped. And I went ahead and added the text information for, hey, just so you're aware, the top 4 of these slots are for tools, and the bottom 4 of these slots are for resources. Now that our pickaxe is equipped, we can close out of the inventory by clicking on the bag again, and our character can move into position to start mining. So I'll go ahead and close out of my inventory, and let's go ahead and move on both versions to the top of the structure. So now I'm in position, and we are going to mine into this structure to see what's on the other side. So let's go ahead and start mining. So I created that same kind of mine progress bar, although mine's a little bit slower. I don't have a huge amount of animation for it going all the way around, but that same visual is still present on 2D as it is in the regular, and I created this hole that I can now walk through to the next television. Now this uses very different technology. On the actual Phoenix edition, these objects are being cut out and changed seamlessly, and this is wild, absolutely amazing technology. On 2D, I don't have the ability to constantly change an object into whatever a player decides to make it. So instead, I decided to make holes as objects. So for example, what this actually did is it placed hole A in front of the wall. So hole A is the same color as the background. So because of that, it creates the appearance like, oh, you've actually just cut out of this object, and this is what this now looks like. And the actual game has tons of these hole objects that can be placed all over the place, and it physically takes the coordinates or where the player is located in the game. It says this is where you need to place the hole, and then the hole will move with the environment so that it always looks like that hole belongs there. It looks like that is actually what the object has changed into. And it's the same thing for adding platforms. With the rammer, you're actually creating platforms in the environment. So we can then say, okay, rammer A has not been used. So if the player uses a rammer, it will place a platform at the player's coordinates where they're located in the game. And this is where that platform will stay, and it will move with the environment simultaneously to look like that platform is now part of the environment. So all of your different holes, all of your different platforms that are being added to the game make it feel like you're able to remove things from the world and add things from the world simultaneously. And because this is an online title, and the Tomorrow Children 2D will have online support, when a player adds one of these holes or adds one of these platforms, that hole or platform will appear for every player that is currently playing the game. And I have to tell the code, this is where that platform is in the game world for each person. And this is what the platform looks like for each person. Is it a hole? Is it a staircase? Is it a flat platform? What needs to be placed there to look like this is here? Now, you'll notice that when I cut this out, this entire section here was actually a full shape. All I did is create this code where when a hole is added, to have the top visual disappear. So if you break into a cave system that's in a structure, then this top layer that is covering the cave will then disappear to tell you, oh, you've discovered a cave, so this is what the rest of it looks like. You don't have to mine all of this because now you can see it. So let's go ahead and go in here. Now, this is actually something that I did not include with the 2D project because I don't have the capabilities of the lighting that the actual Tomorrow Children uses. So this TV is not the TV that is in 2D because I don't have that lighting capabilities. And I did experiment with adding a lighting system into the Scratch software, but it was so resource heavy that it was dramatically reducing the experience and the frame rate. It was not something that was going to be playable. So it was at that point that I decided, let's not focus on doing the lighting and incorporating that into the software. Let's focus on the rest of the game. So I'm going to kind of go through the PS4 version here and move through things without necessarily showing that on 2D because this specific part does not exist on 2D. Okay, and the mechanic for the actual game is that light does damage you. So if you are in the darkness, you will take damage and you need to move into an area that has light. And this is a really cool mechanic that I really wish that I could include on my version of the game because it kind of has you interact with your lighting and other people. Since this is online, another player can walk with you with a light to help you get to areas that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do without somebody helping. So I have my light here, and I can place it down, and then I can bring up my pickaxe, and I can mine into the wall without taking the damage from that darkness. And that looks pretty dark, so let's go ahead and grab the light back, and then we can go through. So this is just a darkness section of the tutorial. And here, now we've returned back to where I am with the 2D recreation. So we can go ahead and interact with both of these TVs. Okay, so this is our first indication of what our goal is where we are. We've already used the pickaxe to break into the island. Now we're told we need to collect resources by mining it. So we can go up to our iron, and I can go ahead and move to the iron on the game here. And we are going to mine it. And when that breaks, it creates 3 pieces of iron that we need to collect and put into our bag. Now, originally, on the Tomorrow Children 2D, I had intended on the iron to be all separate objects. So when you mined iron, it created 3 brand new pieces of iron that you each had to pick up, just like the actual game. But what that ended up doing is when I put it into online mode, I have to, there's the in-game transceiver. When in online mode, each of those iron pieces have to be tracked by its location and its type. So I have to have an X coordinate and a Y coordinate and a what is it and where is it for every single one of those pieces of iron. So I simplified that and decided to make the iron one object. So as soon as you grab the iron on 2D, it'll animate so that the character picks it up. It will add 1 iron to the character's inventory, and then it will change the iron to say, okay, there's only 2 available. And then you can click on it again, and it'll pick up that iron. It'll add a second one to the player's inventory, and then it'll change the visual of, oh, hey, there's only 1 left. And we can click on that. It'll add that third one to the player's inventory. So a little bit different. Instead of having to pick up each of them individually and put them in your bag, you kind of do that, but they're all one object. So I'm only tracking one position. I'm only tracking what one thing is. Instead of having to track all of those different positions for all of those different pieces of iron separately online. The drawback to this is that, in turn, you can't drop the objects. So in the actual game, if I go to the bag here, I can actually drop. Let's see if I can do it. I can actually drop the iron back in any location and somebody else can pick it up. But because I'm not tracking all of the iron individually, I disabled the ability to drop items for right now. Now this is something that might change. This is something that can be improved upon. If I don't have any issues with performance on all of the things being tracked in the game at the same time, I may end up separating the iron into those individual pieces again. But for right now, for performance sake, it's a lot easier and a lot more manageable to run with it all, considering it as one. So let's go ahead and grab this light, and we're going to go ahead and leave. And I'll do the same thing here. Oops. Okay. So we're going to head to the storage. And as you can see, I recreated the text for everything in the game, including the storage text. Although it's slightly different on this specific storage compared to the rest of the game. And we're going to go ahead and place our iron on both of these storage here. So I can press E to load, and I can deposit here. And then the camera actually moves to the island on the actual game. So I decided to have the camera pan to the island in Scratch. And it was, again, there is technically no camera. So it was trying to figure out, how do I make it so that the player stays where they're located? And everything shifts over to look like it is panning. And that's what we ended up doing. And then we have some extra dialogue here because there's a couple of these features that aren't going to be included on 2D, so there's no purpose in having that dialogue. And then we have our go to the subway, and then it takes us to town. And that is the end of the introduction there. So I'll let this continue to play on the PlayStation 4, and then I'll kind of go over a couple more things here. For those that are unaware, The Tomorrow Children is a kind of a parody between capitalism and Marxism. So there's kind of that, it's not Russian, it's, what is the culture for it? I can't particularly think of the region that it's inspired by as far as visuals and some of the aesthetics. But it is interesting, kind of the play that they do to that, because the whole game kind of does have that aesthetic to it and that regional aesthetic. But when you start taking into consideration the parody of both sides, they're kind of fighting each other the whole game. So this is the subway, and I think personally this is the one of the small choices that I decided to make. I think the subway raises a little too slow on the Phoenix Edition, so I decided to speed that up pretty significantly. Because I think this is just, it's cool, I get it, it looks cool, but maybe make it a little bit faster. And we enter the subway, and we have exited the introduction. And this takes us into the credits for the actual game, and then it introduces us to our own town that we can start working on, and kind of tutorializes a little bit more on the town systems and how to build your town. So this is a survival game of a type, community-based survival game. So everybody's going and getting the resources, they're bringing it back. You deposit your resources for your town, you build your structures, you save your people, you build your power supplies, you power the town, you plant your trees. It's community based on everyone kind of constructing and creating their entire civilization back from nothing. Okay. So, I do not have, for this particular stream, I'm not going to showcase the actual town game mode. So, if I click on Town Select here, you can see that these are to grade. This is actually the button for the single player town, and then the second one is the button for the online town. These are not active yet. In fact, this version of the game is just the intro. The rest of it is not on the specific copy. So it's not playable at all on this version. I'd have to open up a completely separate version of the project. But I am going to show a bunch of the different art assets that are present here and kind of talk about how things work. So in the game, you have your food supply, you have your wood, you have your metal, you have your coal, you have your crystal. This is all determined by number. These are all going to be tracked in the Tomorrow Children 2D so that as a player adds one of these items to their game world, it shows, it adds total progress for anybody that's playing it online. So everybody has that resource total to use. If I come over to the crafting bench, the crafting bench can be used, and then you can construct all of your different objects, such as your buildings, your power generators. The Ministry of Labor I did not include for the Tomorrow Children 2D because basically the purpose of this building is to interact with it, and it rewards you with your currency and your experience. For simplicity's sake, I figured let's remove this building and automatically give the players the experience and the currency instead of having to have a separate building, especially since we don't have a 3D environment. How many buildings can we fit in a 2D area without having to walk an extremely long distance? So having a couple less buildings that might not necessarily be needed really helps for kind of not creating a ridiculously long travel time from getting from one side of town to the other. And then we have our seeds for our trees. And that is all that this starts with. And as we can see, there is an island forming right now on the game in front of me. And when it's finished, it'll show up and we can kind of walk to it. And it'll tell you the name of that island. And we can kind of explore. There's chests to open. We can mine through it. This is a really small, basic island because the start of the game only gives you these very, very tiny tutorial islands. But some of your later ones are absolutely massive. You need multiple people to fully explore. It's absolutely crazy. And then in the background, we can see that we have an Isverg, which is the enemies of this game. And they can walk through your town and absolutely cause chaos. Destroy your buildings. You have to repair them with your wood that you've acquired. You can end up getting some weaponry to try to defend the town from it. And that's just one of the many Isverg that you'll see in Tomorrow Children. I do not have this specific Isverg in Tomorrow Children 2D because it's simply too large. But there is large, like medium-sized metal spiders that I have recreated for the Tomorrow Children 2D that are like the boss-style encounters, and then some of the little smaller enemies. And I'm actually going to be bringing up kind of the art that I've been working on and all of the different sprites and assets, as well as some reference photos to kind of talk about the process for that in a moment. So, what I'm going to do is head back. And I am going to bring up some of that art. So, actually, even before that, what I am going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open up the original version of the game, which I called the beta, but it was not a beta. When I released it, I ended up changing it to tech demo, because that's what it was. And this is actually the original. Oops. This is actually the original version of what I showed earlier. And I'm going to disable the PlayStation stream for the moment. So let's go ahead and mute that. And hide this. And I can move this over. So this is actually the original version. That came out. And I'll go ahead and play it. And you'll notice a significant difference between this version and the version that is out. This is the intro. But this is an old intro, and this is a prototype intro. The text is different. I created all of the custom font in pixel art because Scratch has issues with text font. So when you use too much text in the Scratch software, it actually crashes the entire software because of memory problems. So this is actual text from the software. This starts crashing the software periodically. So I resolved that by simply not including actual text and making painted text with pixels. So you'll notice that this is a little different. I just have press space. And you'll notice the railway map looks a little bit different than it did earlier. You'll notice that I don't have the animation for the background. This is actually a completely different map. You'll notice that the travel to town and the tutorial buttons look completely different. This was just an attempt of, okay, there needs to be a button here. You click on it, it loads you into tutorial. And we're going to enter the tutorial. And this is the original version of the loading screen. And again, very different text. We have our full controls that are available from the start here. Instead of only having certain ones available. It's a little bit slower. We have those black bars on the side of the screen. There's a lot of craziness with this, but it gives you an idea on where to start. Here, instead of it highlighting the TV like it does on the original or the new version, this gives the prompt for E. It doesn't have any indicators or tutorialization on the screen, and we can press this, and you'll notice a very significant change here. The dialogue is completely different because I didn't have access to the original dialogue when this was originally made. And it's just really tiny. It uses really goofy font. It is in a really small area. There's no animation. There's no indication on who's talking. And then the movement is just generally really slow. But this, at least, when I made this, gives the sensation of, okay, this is what I'm trying to do before I got to where I am now. And again, this tutorial is completely different. You'll also notice that the ticket looks a little bit different. This is really old art. Even the actual character looks completely different now, or in this version, compared to now. And this ticket is completely fake. So when I created the original tech demo, the inventory screen didn't actually work. So this ticket is actually just a single object that makes it look like, oh, hey, there's a pickaxe in slot 1. This is just a image that shows up on the screen. It has no functionality whatsoever. And if I mine this, that same kind of hole appears just like the other ones. That kind of programming is still generally the same, although you'll notice I had a little bit of an issue because I decided to fade the ground into the sky, and when it adds the holes, you kind of notice it. It kind of creates that visual of, hey, where's the fade? So we can jump up. Continue interacting with TVs on the original. And this will give us access to the shovel and the rammer on the original tech demo that I made. Which also gives some indication for what things will look like on the 2D project when it gets into the more involved islands. So right now we have access to the shovel. Again, the shovel art looks pretty basic. This is completely changed now. And we cut that out. It adds the hole for our stairs. We can now climb the stairs here. You also notice I have that kind of jitter that's going on when you walk into a wall. That's no longer an issue either. And we can continue to make these stairs. Oops, I actually had a bug. And you'll notice this is actually like, this right here is actually the border and the floor, because on Scratch, objects cannot go off screen because there's no actual camera. And instead of making the objects hide, I just decided to cover them up in the original version. So I'm just going to move the character over because I can do that. I'm in the actual editing mode. And as you can see, we've gone a long ways. I reworked all of the code. I reworked all of the art. I reworked the music. I reworked the interfaces compared to the original kind of tech demo, which gave an indication on what things are supposed to look like and how they function. It's a completely different experience in the current iteration of the game. As you can see, I seem to have some weirdness with platforms being placed. It's only placing one at a time. So this was an example on this version of you place a platform to create, it is being really weird, to create a staircase that allows you to go to the next television and so on and so forth. This might be an old version that I grabbed instead of the released prototype, because I shouldn't have that issue with only one object showing up at the same time. But we're gonna go ahead and finish it up, and I can mine the iron. There I had that kind of stutter as the iron showed up, and then we can mine out, and I seem to have an issue with that on this original version. So we're going to leave that there. But that's kind of where things started a while ago to where we are now. And it is interesting. If I pause this, you can actually see these little black bars that are around the character. And these are present in the new version. These are kind of our sensors that tell the character, oh, you're touching a wall, oh, you're touching the ceiling, and can kind of stop motion so that our character doesn't go somewhere they're not supposed to be. Okay, so I'm actually going to leave that open, and I'm going to switch over, and I'm going to show the art. Now, because this software uses 480 by 360 pixels, you're really limited on how much information you can display on the screen. And the actual Scratch Paint Editor is not particularly complicated. So if I open up the Scratch Paint Editor here, oops, paint, you'll notice it's very basic. You have no layers. You have brush, eraser, fill bucket, rectangle, circle, line. That's it. And you have some very basic color options to start with, although you open this up, but it doesn't work correctly. So very extremely basic paint editor here. And so because of the simplicity and because of how small the resolution is on this software, I decided years ago that I was going to use Microsoft Paint. And Microsoft Paint is a fine software for working with this small of a resolution because you don't need anything more complicated than this to make your artwork in a 480 by 360. And some people are like, well, why would you use Paint? You can use Photoshop. I have used Photoshop to make that same artwork before. The layers are nice, but Paint's also free, and I don't need anything more advanced than that to function. So when I decided to create all of the artwork and the art assets, that's what I chose. So I'm going to go ahead and open this here, and we will hide the Scratch and open this up. And as you can see, the very first thing that I did is create a large sprite sheet. And it's going to look a little weird. But the way that I had designed the artwork is, okay, the software is 360 by 480 resolution. So let's create areas that are 360 by 480. So all of these different quadrants here are that 480 by 360 resolution. And this gives me an idea of the exact scale that every single piece of art needs to be. So, okay, I can have all of my buildings located here. I can have all of my UI located here. I can have my enemies located here, the characters located here, so on and so forth. And this allows me to make the art specifically for the software in the exact resolution scale that needs to be without having to change the resolution, to change the scope, because you have that 480 by 360 resolution that you're only working with. So if I bring this up and I zoom in here, you'll notice here we have the different visuals for the main character. We have the different visuals for the eyes and the animation. So I can combine that together later, and I can layer it, and I can turn that into the animation for the character blinking. We have all of our objects for if the character is interacting with something, if the character is not. Our different televisions, our different character colors, our different character stances. You'll notice that there are some hair changes here because this was experimenting with what does the character's hair look like? How should I design that in a limited small number of pixels? Here we have some of the trees that'll be cut down. We have all of our different symbols for our objects. We have our basic UI, our buildings, our bus, the different shop vendor colors, the counter for how many civilians have been saved in the environment, our storage containers, our kind of treadmill for powering and supplying our town, the subway station entrance, billboards for placing new town structures, health bars. Down here we have all of the animation for our store vendors. So this is actually a fully animated worker that is at each of the kiosks. So I have it so that the character blinks, the character will look left and right, and the character will look down and start reading the piece of paper that is in his hand before putting it back. And these are all of the different costumes for the sprites that it'll change to as you're playing the game. We have our workbench that we already saw in the actual Phoenix edition. Our walkie-talkie, our transceiver, the animation for our treadmill so it looks like it's moving. Here we have some examples of working on the ticket. So this is one of the oldest versions of the ticket. This was an attempt on trying to make it a little bit closer to the actual game experience. And this is basically the end result here, with all of the items actually in it. And here we have the new design for the pickaxe, the shovel, the chainsaw, the rammer, and the shotgun. Here we have just some basic larger versions of those same shapes. We have our trackers for how much inventory our town has of everything. We have our civilians. We have our detail screen with our custom text, all of our buttons, our tutorial text, our revive screen if our character goes down, our currencies, our text boxes. Here we have some of the Itzverg. So this is actually the spider enemy that I was talking about, and the scale from our character to the enemy itself. We have the different pieces of the enemy so that it can be rotated and moved to create those different animation sections. I have not actually animated the spider yet. We have the smaller Itzverg, which are here, which are in the actual game, and I'm actually going to bring that up now. So if I go and I will... Which one is it? It is... this one. Hold on. It's not the right one. It's this one. It's not showing up. Let's see here. Okay, so right here we have... This is a picture from the game that I grabbed. And this is the actual creature for the Itzverg. So it's not a great picture, but it gives me enough reference to kind of redesign things to try to be a little bit closer to what it actually looks like. So with this reference, it's kind of like, okay, this is the size that this creature needs to be. How can I recreate that in the same scale? And it was a lot of playing around with it, trying to figure out exactly, and this is what I ended up coming out with. And this is the animation for the wings flapping and the legs moving to really create that feeling like it is moving through the environment after the player. So... And then if I continue through here, we have, again, the inventory screen. I kind of stuck some of the text all over the place. This is one of the larger islands that will eventually be available in the single player and online town mode with different resources and example. Here is all of the text font that I created. This took way too long to get designed. And of course, because I'm the crazy individual I am, decided to make both a highlighted version with a border and a non-highlighted version, and this was created in pixel art. So I created the smaller lowercase letters, the smaller uppercase letters, the larger lowercase letters, the larger uppercase letters, the secondary font type in smaller and larger, the number system in smaller and larger, and the third font type for the storage and different things like that. Here we have some examples of the puzzles that need to be played in order to unlock new buildings in the game. We have some of the UI on this last side and the store pages. So here we have the Union Shop that kind of gives an example of, okay, this is the spacing, this is what how items are going to be displayed, this is the currency that's involved, this is how much you have, so on and so forth. So kind of dividing this out into completely separate 480 by 360 squares, this helps to give a realization of the size of everything in the game world and designing it specifically for this software in this specific scale. Okay. And outside of that, I can bring up one more thing here. So an example of getting all of that animated correctly, let's see if I can bring up. Let's see. I might not be able to find it at this exact... Oh, here it is. So an example of getting all of that animated, for example, is when I can combine all of those different animation frames together. That's not the right one. That's the reference of the character. So this, I can zoom in here. And this gives a general visual created as a GIF of what this looks like when I take those paint assets and combine them into an animation form, so that this is what it looks like when it's played. This is what it looks like when it is functioning in the game. So that lightning that I animated separately is put into place. The treadmill itself is moving. The floor is moving. The television screen is animated. All of that comes together, and this is what it turns into. So this has been a really fun experience working on this project, all the way from the early original build prototype to where I am now with the introduction done and almost finished with the full town experience and getting all of the online functionality in place for how that works and how it tracks things. Scratch has a limit on how much information can be sent online. It can actually only track 8 things online. So when you have more than 8 resources, how do you track that? So it's been an experience at trying to combine all of the different stat tracking into one long number, so that instead of it tracking across those 8 different things, it's tracking everything in one long digit at the same time, and making sure that that converts correctly and functions, and there's no problems, there's no hiccups with something showing what it is, where it is. And we get closer and closer into finishing. So I think that's pretty much it for today. That gives kind of a breakdown behind the scenes on the original prototype, the current intro, kind of the how-tos and how things are done behind the scenes there, some of the art, Most of my art is pixeled by pixel on Paint. It's a long process. I think it looks great. It's something that I will probably do for additional games in the future. And that's been a big process of trial and error over the years, moving forward and improving upon things over time, figuring out how to do pixel art. It's just taking the opportunity to experiment and get better at both the artistic side and the coding side to get where I am now. And once this game is done, it will be released as a free game on my website and both the scratch.mit.edu website as a portfolio piece and homage to the Tomorrow Children game. So I thank everyone for watching. This has been an absolute blast. I'm so happy that I've been able to show some of the behind the scenes work and how things function. I hope it was entertaining. I hope that it was understandable. And I hope to do this again. So thank you, everyone, and have a great night.